to the curve where ideas take flight, blending tech.
All right. Well, again, thanks for joining us on the podcast today. We've got a guest that I'm really excited about. This is Dr. Dwayne Harapnuik, and he was very influential to me in my learning journey. One of the professors who began the digital learning and leading program at Lamar University that has since shifted to, I believe, the applied digital learning. I think that's what it's called now. And really, I'm excited to have him just because I love to hear him talk about learning. And so Dr. Harapnuik, would you tell us real quickly before we kind of get into the meat of this, just what you're doing now, the role you're playing in kind of helping teachers, helping develop teachers and education leaders?
Well, I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to see what you folks are doing, and it's so good catching up with a colleague, former student who's now a colleague. Although you were a colleague when you were a student too, so this is exciting. I see that you and BG are changing the world one learner at a time, and you're sharing wonderful ideas and insights. So I thank you for inviting me here. I've got to give you a little bit of history. I'm, believe it or not, a high school dropout. Yes, who went back to school and realized that school is not really an enjoyable place for a lot of people. It wasn't for me. I dropped out. It didn't work. And I'm like any psychologist. I'm an educational psychologist, but I emphasize the psychology side of things. I wanted to fix things. I wanted to fix school. So as I was studying for my doctorate and doing some experiments, I realized that educators have a responsibility to not just prepare students for the test. You got to prepare them for the world. Okay. And the best way to prepare them for the world is to give people real work to do. Okay. So I'm all about creating a significant learning environment where you can give students choice, help them take ownership of their learning, help them to develop their voice while they work on something real. Okay. And if you get kids to do, or adults to do something real, they own it. It's theirs. The engagement comes into being. The desire to actually make a difference comes into being. The work, the responsibility, and the excitement of sharing what they've built or what they created. Look what I did. After I dropped out of school, I was a carpenter. And one of the most exciting things I did when I was building stuff was, at the end of the day, I'd look over my shoulder and go, oh my gosh, I built that. I built that. We moved away from that city where I built all those projects. And I remember when my boys were young, I drove them around to all those condos and homes and all the stuff that I built. That never goes away. I own that. Okay. I was proud, 20 years later to show my boys what I built. That feeling, that ownership, I built that. I created that project. I was able to actually build this robot, and look what this robot was able to do. I was able to build this portfolio that shows how I can integrate math and science and all these amazing things together. I built that. If we can stimulate that passion, I built that, oh my gosh, the sky's the limit with learning. Okay. As a person who wants to motivate people to do that, you have to come alongside the learner as a coach, as a guide, and as a mentor. And you've got to model these things. So this is kind of my approach to learning. And it really comes out of, being a real person trying to fix a system. So this is where I'm coming from. I'm a learning theorist today. I build master's programs. I've worked on doctoral programs where I help educators learn how to take innovation projects and change the world for the learners. And that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I love that. And I really kind of just straight off the bat, just kind of build onto what you were just talking about, because one of the things that we like to focus on really at Region 7 in our department, but especially with this podcast, is how we can influence learning in students. We want to improve student outcomes, we want to improve their success, and everything that we do for teachers, we want that to be really directed toward their learnings. So one of the areas that we like to focus on particularly relates to authentic learning, which I know that you just talked about, and personalized learning. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And I know that's been a really significant thing for you and for your family directly, even based on kind of where you live and how you raised your kids. But how we can bring personalized learning into the classroom to really meet individual student needs.
Well, I I want to engage you in this conversation because you did something really cool in your master's project, right? You're a social studies
Yes.
teacher, and you took a look at ways of building social projects, social studies projects that would allow the learner to engage and bring in their environment, their community, a variety of other things. And you developed a project within your social studies classroom that allowed students to sort of build documentaries and build, do project-based learning that allowed them to actually do real things.
Yeah.
That is what I believe educators need to do by allowing your learner to identify something important. So, for example, I think I gave you an example of a social studies project where people were studying the Korean War, and a bunch of students went out to the community in a senior citizens home and took a look and interviewed, soldiers and former people who lived through that. And then you took those ideas and you adapted them to your own. You made your project your own, and then you were sharing your project with your own learners, right? I think that's the challenge we have as educators. All that can fit within curriculum requirements, right? You're still doing social studies. Students can actually, do a documentary with a video. There's so many things that can be done if you allow a choice of a project, and students can focus on different things. They might have a family member. That brings about agency. That brings about a reality, and you're integrating students working on something that is curriculum based. They're studying history, which is kind of boring, but yet it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
It could be exciting. There could be a Korean pilot in the old age home down the road, and you can hear these stories. I'm currently taking care of my wife's mother-in-law as she's older. We've moved in to take care of her, and I live in an over 55 complex. Oh my gosh. Whenever there's a vent in the community room, the stories that I get to hear about the different things that all these people have done, it's just amazing. We've got people in our community wanting to share their lives. Well, you know what? I might not as old as everybody else is in this community, but I learn so much. And then I get to tell people about it. That activity of learning about something, building a documentary, creating something, adding it to a portfolio, and then sharing it with a class or maybe sharing it with a broader community, not only do you get agency, students find their voice. It's real, it's genuine. And you can do this with math. You can do this with science. Math explains how the world works. Math is this amazing, wonderful tool that can help a downhill mountain biker or a dirt jumper calculate how big of a ramp he needs to make in order to survive the ridiculous stunt he's going to perform. Science is another way that we can explain how the world works. We have all these amazing things that we do in school that not just prepare people for a test, but it encourages people to prepare them for life. Right. So for me, it's all about looking at what a learner is interested in and maximizing that, taking advantage of that. And I learned that very, very early when I was a student teacher. I remember sitting at the back of the classroom doing my observation, and the guy at the front was talking, and I was having a hard time staying awake myself. But I was watching. There was a kid at the back of the room who was looking at a comic book. There's another kid just over here who was drawing, and I saw, these kids are engaging in something and they're creating something. And it just dawned on me, what the kid was looking at, the comics and what he was applying could actually be integrated into what the person was talking about. The person over there sketching something that could have been integrated into what the person was talking about. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, talking isn't teaching. If this guy would have just paid attention to who was in the room, there was an enormous amount of creativity sitting right there. I remember talking to these kids after class and getting them to show me what they've done. And if we would have sort of, if this guy would have reached out, if this teacher would have reached out to these two students, they could have shared their work and it could have been integrated into the subject that he was involved in. So I think the most important thing, if you're an educator, is look around, look in your classroom. There's brilliance there in those seats. There's engagement just waiting to be tapped, right? And if you can find different ways where you can bring that artistic ability. Most people who are into comics, guess what? They're storytellers. They're storytellers. we're sitting in an English classroom where if this teacher would have integrated this storytelling capability, the illustration capability, all those amazing things, it could be amazing what could be brought to light. You could take a contemporary variation of Shakespeare, or a contemporary variation of something else, and get students to build a modern, animated comic about it. Can you imagine that? That's taking an old story and then turning it into something new. The lessons that could be learned there, the ownership, the engagement. Man, the kids will put down their iPhones for that. They will. So for me, learning is all about looking at your audience, your learners, and getting them engaged in the learning process and sharing your excitement about learning with them. So that for me is personalization. That's got engagement. These little things, but it requires us doing more than just testing preparing them to answer the questions on the exam. So you have to have a little bit of courage. Carl, what did it feel like for you to go out there and do the project-based thing, knowing you had certain requirements?
Yeah.
Was there a little bit of anxiety?
Oh, absolutely, there was. I remember and I was really fortunate that I had some teaching partners that I got to work with, because that kind of helped to share that load a bit. And one of the things that we decided early on was that when we were going to adopt some of these principles, some of these ideas, we just said, well, we've just got to dive in and do it. That we couldn't, and I get that there's an appropriate time to perhaps baby step our way into some certain things, but for us, we recognized that we just needed to just jump in and say, hey, look, we're going to commit to this and iterate our way through this, knowing that we were going to fail as we attempted it to begin with. But we learned so much about ourselves and our students, and we discovered that they had far more capability than we imagined that they had, because we never asked them to show it. We never asked them to demonstrate it before. And then when we asked them to, that's where it was just remarkable, the things that they made that we would have never done, because we wouldn't have done it. We didn't ask them to do it because these were not things that we would have done. But when we gave them that choice and gave them that opportunity to, instead of telling them what to do, we asked them to show us how they learned it, show us what they learned. And that was remarkable, to see the things that they could do, because they're like you just said, they're brilliant. We just had never tapped into it before.
Carl, you say something really interesting there. When you were talking about the interactions between you and your students, so often it feels like we develop a transactional relationship with our students in the way we conduct our classes of, you do this action for me, I will give this grade for you in there. But with the use of project-based learning, building those connections, allowing the students' creativity and curiosity to drive their learning, I think it changes that relationship between you and the student. It's no longer transactional. Now it's more mentor, coach, director, leader, facilitator with that. Can y'all kind of elaborate a little bit more on that kind of structure? What happened in your classroom when you went to project-based learning?
Yeah, that was exactly what it was. What I loved about that was, I was no longer the person who had to have all of the knowledge. I was no longer the person who and BJ, you and I've talked about this a little bit before as well. I wasn't the person who had to declare all of the truth from the stage, but I became actually a co-learner with them, which I think really improved the relationship that I had with my students, because they were learning things that I didn't even know about my own subject. And when we're talking about history, it's so vast. There's certainly things that I didn't realize about it. I have eras of time that I liked and I like to study personally, but they were able to tell me stuff that I didn't even know, and that was that empowered them, I think, and especially when we're talking about agency, autonomy, that really leveled up their engagement, because I knew something that my teacher didn't know, and then I just became that facilitator, that person who was their cheerleader, who was there to help them succeed. And when they learned that that's my role, it was to help them be successful. Man, that really changed the dynamic completely, because I was no longer the authoritarian who was just there to beat them down. I was there to really help them succeed. Yeah.
If I may add something to the notion of that transactional relationship, again, by giving the students agency, giving them ownership, you are no longer the authority. You're the coach. You still need to retain the coach, mentor, guide responsibility, but you're also a peer learner. You're a learner too. So that's exciting. There's one more thing that I think is really important. We have to recognize that learning happens all the time and everywhere. It doesn't just happen in the classroom. And so the idea of blended learning is not a new idea. I had been looking at that in the literature. We called it something different. It was just called preparing for class 30, 40 years ago. But blended learning, this notion that we learn all the time and everywhere, we can take our Androids, our iPhones, we can go out there, we can document something. On the way to class, if you're riding a bus, you might be working on something and you have an idea, you're going to add it to this particular project you're working on. School becomes a place where you come together to collaborate, to work with others. But individually, or you go out in pairs or with groups, you can actually do other things. But individually, students can also work on projects. Whether you're using Google Docs or Microsoft OneDrive, you can access resources from anywhere. We're using Zoom today, and it's an amazing, wonderful collaborative tool. It becomes a tool. Technology moves away from being just a distraction or keeping up on social media, and it becomes this tool that we can leverage space and time. We can work all the time and everywhere. And I know this. My two boys are in their mid 20s now, and they were exposed to technology earlier on, and they use technology in amazing ways to just recreate their worlds. Both my boys do different things, but they're artists, they're designers, they're creators. They build, they create because technology enables them to do so much more. They leverage space and time. And my younger son doesn't even really work on a laptop. The only time he uses a laptop is when he has to build sophisticated ideas that he's going to share with his colleagues before they start wrapping cars and doing amazing designs. So most of his work is done on his iPhone. It's amazing. He can create stuff, share it with people right away. What do you think? Is that what you want? Is that what you want it to look like? And so technology becomes this an amazing enabling tool. Also, it's a communication tool. It's a collaborative tool. My younger son can hardly wait for this fall because he's going back to SEMA in California, but he's been communicating, sharing ideas with a bunch of colleagues. And when they get there to Nevada, all these pieces come together that they've been working on jointly, collaboratively in different parts of North America. That's the world we live in today. That's the world. And if you can bring that world into the classroom and then also blow the doors off the classroom, blow the walls off the classroom, and help kids to realize this is the world we live in. It's amazing. There's never been a better time to be a learner. Now, Carl, you've heard me say that back in the 90s when I was getting going with the internet. I was saying this has never been a better time to be a learner. And then what the good thing that came out of COVID is, guess what? We've got data to show we can do this. I've been arguing for 30 years we can do this. And now we can do this. My only fear, I do have a fear, are we falling back into the, okay, now that we're back in classroom, okay, forget it. Put your devices away. Put your devices away. We're here to learn. I don't know. So I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned that now that COVID is over, that people are going to return to the old ways because it is easier, and it is easier to give all the multiple choice exam than it is to look at all those individual projects and mark them in a different way. So I'm excited, but I'm at the same time I'm a little bit cautious. But blended learning, it's the key. It's the way that we work in the world.
Yeah. I love your perspective and your take on technology, and that's something that we even have talked about. That just because we've got, and I'm trying to think of how we were talking about this the other day, but just because we've got a shiny new tool, it doesn't mean that and I'm going to pivot a little bit, Dr. Harapnuik, from what you were just saying, that sometimes the shiny new tool becomes the thing, right? We're going to stick this in front of everybody, and we're going to just have the greatest new thing. But it, I think, really opens up the opportunity for learning, and so we've got to approach it that way. That this is a device for learning, this is a device for communication, this is a device for collaboration, and sometimes I think that we default to perhaps low level activities just because there's something shiny to click on. BJ, I know that we've talked about that a little bit, but yeah.
Definitely, yeah. So in a previous podcast, we mentioned this notion that, technology should be a tool, not a toy, and that if it doesn't provide us some enhancement to either learning or efficiency, then we probably don't need to spend a lot of time with it. And that's the same for our students. I agree 100% with what you're saying, and Dr. Harapnuik. This idea of blowing the doors off or the walls out of the classroom, allowing our students to interact with the world around them and amongst them. And you're right, we are seeing a pullback to some extent now that we're over what people saw as COVID. I mean, COVID, I don't want to use this term lightly because I think it's overused, but COVID forced that paradigm shift. The tools, the technology were there for 10, 15, 20 years before, but it was COVID that forced the hand of many people, many laggards or late adopters to these things. And the gut reaction is, now that it's gone, we'll go back to what we were doing before. I am hopeful that as long as we can present the argument in a way that improves people's efficiency, improves their workflows, and improves their access to items that would benefit their students, I think we can win them over. I think they've now built in their habits to some extent, more use of technology in the right ways through the collaborative nature and all those things on there. So I am hopeful with that as well. But I think that's one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast now, is to try and encourage people to continue down that path, because I think we're seeing more integration of technology in the classroom, but it's not always done in a collaborative way. It's not always done in a way that would reach out and allow the world to come into the classroom. It's usually done as, I am simply replacing a worksheet with a digital worksheet. And if that's all that we've done to move the needle, I mean, okay, that's a movement, but I don't know if it's going in any direction right or wrong with that. So, those are some of the things I've seen.
I've been watching that for a long time, and I've been in this game for a little while. I earned this white hair that I have, so, and it is a challenge to fall back. But fortunately, and I have to qualify this, I'm a little bit of a delusional optimist, even though we've got some challenges. I also believe that once you've been exposed to seeing what your learners can create, and once you've gone down that path of letting go, because using the internet, you got to let go a little bit. You got to give up some of that control, right? Once you let go a little bit, and they lived through it. Oh, they'll be okay. Once you start to see the potential and see the engagement increase, and instead of looking at Facebook or whatever, the kids are trying to find an answer. They're using their devices as a tool to solve a problem. Right. Once you start to see that, give them a little bit of freedom to go down that path, it's hard to go back to the old way. Okay. So I'm optimistic in that regard. And AI. AI is the newest boogeyman, right? Although, to be candid, up here in Canada, most provinces are banning iPhones or phones from the classroom. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so this is a concern of mine, and we maybe we could have another podcast just on that one topic. But this is sobering, because you've got this most amazing communication, collaboration, creation tool in the palms of the students' hands, and all you got to do is let go a little bit and let them create with it, and you're going to get engagement off the charts. You are. Especially if you give them that ownership and choice to choose certain things. And we can do that, or to work collaboratively and solve problems together, because guess what? That's a real world. Now, the next shiny thing is AI. Oh my gosh, AI is it's terrible, because now we're not going to be able to allow students to write boring essays. Oh my God. Now that teachers have realized getting students to regurgitate information in a boring essay is done. You can't do that. You have to create essays and assignments and activities that are real. AI doesn't do really well with real stuff. AI is simply a sophisticated search engine that uses sophisticated Boolean operators and algorithms to pull a bunch of information and throw it together. And for the most part, half of it's wrong. And most people don't know how to qualify and question AI properly to get it to even generate authentic answers. It's sobering. AI, I use AI every day, but the reason I can use AI every day successfully is I know how to ask questions. Most of our learners do not know how to ask questions. because that isn't school. School is this going to be on the test? School is giving the right answer. And by middle school, most kids know what the right answer is. It was at the back of the book. You just got to memorize that. Most kids by middle school, even late elementary, know how school works. Just give the teacher the right answer. Put the right answer on the worksheet. I can use AI. They used to Google it. AI is just a more sophisticated form of Google. Okay. And I used to use Google in the early days with Boolean operators. Boolean operators, ands, commas, quotations, a variety of other words to be able to drill down and tease out the exact information. Now I can use it with questions. But most of our students don't know how to ask questions. And I get people at the graduate level who try to use AI and pass off answers. And it's obvious they didn't know how to ask, AI, ChatGPT, or whatever tool you're using. Could I have actually peer-reviewed, authenticated resources? If you don't do that, it'll just give you crap. And so we live in a world where we've got this amazing tool. As a researcher, I use AI all the time. It's a sophisticated form of Wikipedia. It helps me get started and narrow down ideas and test out this idea here and test out this idea here. And then once I get some feedback, oh, okay, I didn't look at that from that perspective, right? It's this amazing tool that allows me to hone and sharpen my thinking and my questions to drill down to what I really want to do. And it's another tool, just like our mobile devices, that unfortunately we're not going to use properly until we learn ourselves what it can do and share students with that. Also, listen, when students write stuff, please use AI to revise it, right? Because I'm tired of reading crappy writing. So if you use AI as a tool, as an editor, please. We shouldn't be afraid of it, right? And guess what? If we go back to what we talked about earlier on, if your kids are working on something real and genuine, it's theirs. A tool like AI is only going to enhance what they're creating. So we shouldn't be afraid of it. We shouldn't hide from it. Also, what I would do, I'd use it as a bit of a stick for teachers who just want to stay with that standardized testing. Guess what? If all you're doing is delivering content and all you do is you give out standardized tests, your days are numbered as an educator, because AI is going to be much better at that. We don't need teachers who deliver content and simply get regurgitation, because that's what AI can do. Now, if you're a coach, if you're a guide, if you are a mentor who are asking students to create something, build something, learn something about your community, go down the street, take a look at the economic impact or the environmental impact of this development, what's happening there? AI can be a tool to help you refine your thinking, but what you're going to create is going to be real. That's the exciting part. So again, hopefully AI will be used effectively. Now, hopefully it won't take 30 years for people to realize this online learning thing. Carl knows this. I started teaching fully online in 1994. Fully online in 1994. So COVID was really an opportunity for me to go, see, I told you so. Right? So hopefully with AI, it won't take that long.
Yeah.
It's a tool. And if we use it wrong, it will replace bad teachers. Yeah. If we use it right, a good teacher who wants to prepare students for the world, who wants to spark those creative juices, right? Who wants kids to build something, or their adult learners to build something. AI is just another amazing tool that we can use. Yeah. So I'm not afraid of AI. I am afraid of our tendencies in education to take a long time to use the tool properly. So anyway, I throw out the AI.
No, I love it. Yeah. I love what you're saying there.
I think I'm wrong about seeing the potential.
I love what you're talking about there. And that's really it. You kind of echo some things that we've been saying ourselves, that when the product becomes the point, then you've already lost. But if we lean into the process of learning, then it's a remarkable tool that can do wonderful things. And if the worst thing that I do is teach my students how to ask good questions, which you just said that's essential for using AI. If that's the worst thing I do is teach them how to ask good questions, then I think I've been a pretty successful educator there.
Well, I feel like with AI, it gives us an opportunity to personalize the way that we deliver learning in the classroom in a way we've never really easily been able to do. It takes a lot of the heavy lift out of that on there. And I think if we can train teachers to use it correctly, we're going to get a huge amount of benefit by personalizing what we would normally
Yeah.
do to each of our learners in the different pathways and ways that they would want and need. Just if you were just to take that and supplant what we're currently doing now. So I'm very hopeful with it. I think we have to expose teachers to it, and we have to walk them through how it works, how it doesn't work, and all of those things so that they can do it. The thing that constantly keeps going in the back of my mind anytime we talk about AI is that, we're right now in the Wild West days of AI. We're still all trying to figure out what it is, what it's not, how it'll be used. The kindergartners that we have in class now will be growing up in a world where it's ever present, and they're expected to know directly and indirectly how it works, because the jobs that they're going into, the businesses that they'll build, the colleges that they'll go to will have these type of tools integrated in some form or fashion. And I posit that we're going to have two types of students going forward: the ones that were allowed to work alongside with AI, and the ones that weren't. And it's a hypothesis, but I know one of those is probably going to have a better outlook in their job outlook, in their careers, and all those things. And so I'm really trying hard to make sure that we really focus those kind of conversations with our teachers.
I agree. I agree that we have to expose people to the potential of AI. But I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to caution something. You said something, and Carl's going to go, yeah, Harapnuik's going to mention that if we train teachers, I don't think we should be training teachers or training anybody. Training is a behaviorist model of either operant conditioning or classical conditioning, but it's basically action response. I was in the military. I was trained to close with and kill the enemy. And you have to train people to do that, because when you're in circumstances where it has to be an instant reflex, that's what you do. With things like creativity and things like AI or things like the blended learning, all the technologies we're using today, you don't train people. I would argue you create an environment, you immerse people in that environment, and you give them the opportunity to explore. Now, you mentioned they need to explore these things. That's the key, okay? Teachers need to explore and to experiment and to go, oh my gosh, I didn't know it could do. Oh, it can do that. What else can it do? Once you get that, once that curiosity goes, oh my gosh, what else can I do? Then they're experimenting. What if I try this? What if I try that? What if I were to use this here? Okay. So you want to stimulate that natural curiosity, that learner's mindset that we actually have unfortunately trained out of our students because of the conditioning we do to them throughout the educational process. But once you get back to that natural inquisitivistic nature, that exploration is the key. And then what you can do as coaches, as guys, as mentors, go, oh, look what I found. Look what I found. Look what I was able to do. And people go, what? How did you do that? Well, I did this and this. And then try it. That's not training. That's sharing. That's showing, oh my gosh, look at colleagues, friends. We can do all these cool things. And then once your educators, once the people that are working in your environment are exploring and experimenting, it's part of their world. It becomes part of what they're going to bring into the classroom, and then they can share it with their students. I'm really cautious about this because over the years, I found that training people, that behavioral model doesn't work. And I listened to a ton of podcasts, and I'll try to make this as short as I can and summarize things. But I moved, so my camera went out of focus. Sorry about that. Just the other day, I'm about to write about this on my on my website too. Just the other day, I was listening to a doctor interview another doctor, and the doctor that was being interviewed was the authority on obesity, the world's authority. He's been studying this for 40 years. He's the world's authority. And he said, you know what? The behavioral model, the clinical model of managing obesity through behaviorism doesn't work. It's been a failure. For the last 30 years, we've adopted this sort of behavioral model of, more, just coaching and telling people what to do, condition response. He says it's a total failure. Now, as scientists, we're going to use the pharmacological model because we can just prescribe Ozempic and away we go. and it's going to solve the world's problems. Now we'll have to deal with a whole bunch of other side effects, but this will solve the problems because behaviorally, we weren't, North Americans have the worst level of obesity ever. All of these behavioral models of, up here in Canada, we have something called participation, right? So behaviorally, condition response, a little bit of guilt mixed in, condition response doesn't work with our health. People are dying because of this, and that doesn't work. And so we're going to go away from that because it didn't work. We didn't even try the cognitive model. What I'm arguing for here is let's move away from this behavioral model of answers, questions, answers, just regurgitating information, and allow ownership, which is cognitively related, but it's also effectively related. Address the whole person, address the heart, address the mind, get learners to do something. That's the psychomotor domain. Combine all the domains of the individual and get them creating and building, and it's going to change the world. It is. I'm changing the world one learner at a time through the master's program at Lamar University, the Applied Digital Learning Program. But I'm also doing it individually. I do a lot of workshops. I do a lot of consulting. I do a lot of work everywhere. I have tons of anecdotal evidence, which I'm pulling together in more books, where if we allow people to engage in something real, we can use our phones, we can use technology, we can do it all the time, everywhere. And guess what? You're not only preparing students for the test, because there's a fair amount of research to show that if you build a project, you do the math to build a project, math means something. It isn't just filling in information in a formula. Okay. When you take a look at the chemical composition of different things you're putting together in science, and you're building something real or you're working with something, that means something. You could be tested on it because you've owned it, you experienced it. So preparing people for the test is one thing, but you can also prepare people for life by getting them to do real things. It takes a little bit more work at the front end, but the back end is amazing to see what can be done.
Yeah.
It's more work. I think we can change the world one learner at a time by changing our classrooms, our sphere of influence. Create that significant learning environment, give your learners choice, give them ownership, help them find their voice by building something that they can share with the world. It's exciting. And even when you're doing the PD and professional learning with your colleagues in your district, man, focus on what they can create, what they can build, and how they can ignite those sparks of curiosity that are just waiting to be just ignited. That's all around them. Yeah, we can really make a difference. We live in an amazing time. I'm a delusional optimist. So I'm just excited about what we can do. But yeah, it's an amazing time.
Yeah, that's great. And I remember talking about creating environments, and I think that's so significant to think about that every aspect of the environment is really important for the learning, and it's not just the curriculum, and it's not just the assessments. It's about everything that goes into that environment. And so I think that perhaps we need to think about that a little bit more. Even and you're challenging me as you're talking that even in my sessions that I do for professional development is how am I crafting that learning environment so that the teachers who come in don't feel like I've just talked at them and I've wasted their day, but they can leave and go away with something that really is significant, that's been helpful to them. So that's a good reminder. Thank you for that.
You mentioned something in there that really struck a nerve with me in a good way. Whenever I was doing project-based learning in the classroom, I was a CTE teacher, so we were focusing on real-world skills, building up their capacity, and doing things like that. But what took me the longest time, earlier on in the conversation, we talked about the giving up of control, and I think that's essential for a teacher going into project-based learning, building into blended learning, and all these kind of things. But that is one of the hardest things to do as a teacher, and it took me a while to realize that I had to put my pride aside. And I had to remove myself as being the obstacle in my students' learning sometimes. Because like you had mentioned, when you spark their curiosity, whenever you connect their learning to something that is very impactful to them, being very meaningful to them, and very close to their heart, typically they will outdo themselves in ways you never could imagine. And I found that I was holding my students back because I was still constraining them to a pattern of teaching that I was comfortable with and I was familiar with. And it was only once I realized that I was the problem and I needed to move, that my students were able to do amazing things. I mean, things that you were mentioning that you would have never expected from these students. And honestly, frankly, what was most amazing and impactful to me, and why I'm so interested in blended learning, and such a big believer in these things, is the students that were some of my best performing students were the students that were having problems in other classes that would be more of a traditional classroom environment. Those students tended to thrive in our environments because they were approaching a learning in a different way. And I think that's very important. I think that's where some of the strengths of blended learning comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one more thing too that I think is really important. I was just thinking about an example of a real world example, and I've been like Skinner. Yes, the behavior Skinner. He experimented on his kids. He did. I've been experimenting on my boys for a long time. When my boys were learning mathematics, they were building dirt jumps, and they were into my boys races, professional racers. They rode bikes professionally, and they were involved in stunts and dirt jumps. And so when you build a dirt jump or you build a ramp, you using physics, you can calculate the trajectory, the speed, and a variety of other things. My son was working on a video project, and he wanted to do sort of a final stunt right at the very end. And he had to clear a certain obstacle, and he had to land in a very specific place. And so I'll never forget this. Dad. Okay, do you remember when we were building the dirt jump park? We were working on the ramps. Yeah, what was that? What was that called? Because I got this stunt. I want to do this. And I need to calculate how fast I need to go, how high I need to go. And then the challenge is I've got to clear one obstacle, but I got to drop down, because if I go too far, I got to kill myself. Right? So we used a whole bunch of math to calculate the trajectory, the speed that he had to go at. He was, I was following him alongside in the car as he was racing down this road. We took all these factors into account, doing sophisticated physics. But he pulled off the stunt. We built the ramp. We did all the things necessary. We pulled it out there, and it worked. The lessons learned there, right? When he was younger, when he and his brother were younger, they were building dirt jump parks. They actually started a process where they built a dirt jump park in a city, and they contacted the mayor's office. And these real world projects have enabled my boys to do stuff as young men. My younger son is part owner of a customization shop. I joke around saying he's still playing with cars. He's still playing with cars. But most of the cars are Ferraris, Porsches, McLarens. His shop that he's at did up 4 McLarens for Orton Senna anniversary. Anyway, he's playing with cars, but most of the cars are $250,000, $500,000 or more. And the work that he's able to do is because he was able to create projects and manage his own projects when he was a kid. He grew up this way. Everything was a project, right? That's how you learned about the world. You wanted to build something, you wanted to create something, you wanted to solve something, right? You want to innovate something, you want to add something to something else. Well, build a project, figure it out. It's amazing to see what can be done. Now, there's a problem that we have to address. There's an elephant in the room. The biggest challenge for my son, he has a hard time hiring people because most people don't know how to actually run a project. Most people have a hard time doing something other than exactly what they've been told. And so his limitation on his business is that most people who come out of university can do a few things if they're told. And that project capacity, the inquisitiveness, the ability to think on your feet, make adjustments, trial, fail. Hey, that ramp that we built, the final iteration, I think, was 5 iterations down, right? We didn't get it on the first try. But that's just the world you live in if you're creating. So the challenge that we face is that you also have to help these project builders recognize not everybody can work the way that you do. So as you're building a project, you also have to become a coach. You also have to become a guide. You also have to become a mentor. So what my son is learning is that, most people who can work in a shop, he'll coach and guide and mentor them. If they have the right attitude, and they're willing to explore and to experiment, he can help anybody to do what he does. But that's a challenge. So the other thing we have to think about is that these young men and women that we're coaching and guiding and mentoring, you also have to get them to recognize they have to pass it on.
Yeah.
Because the system of education we have produces cogs that will fit in a traditional environment, right? And those totally creative, those innovative people are far and few between. But if there's enough curiosity, you can actually coach and guide and mentor them. So there's some dynamics here. As we get these kids to take ownership of their projects, we also have to get them to realize, hey, you want to share that. You want to get other people as excited about these projects as you, and then they can come along and join you. Because if you don't, down the road, when you're trying to hire somebody to work with you in your business, it's going to be a nightmare. So think about that. Think about that. We're preparing not just future entrepreneurs with this project-based blended learning approach, but we're also improving society. Think of the potential we have here by doing the things that we do. Again, delusional optimist here. But man, if we can ignite some of those future entrepreneurs, there's more Elon Musks out there. There are more Elon Musks. Think about that. Think about having a potential Elon Musk, right, that you worked with, and the creativity, the excitement for learning that's there. Somebody inspired him. I think it was his mom and dad. His mom and dad were quite flaky people in that regard. They're very, very creative. So his mom and dad inspired him. But even when he went through, well, he was home educated too. So, but even when he was working with other people, there was other people who just encouraged him and helped him to develop that spirit. You know, that excitement, that passion for learning and solving big problems. It's exciting. You guys are scratching the surface, and I'm helping you pour some gasoline on the fire.
Hey, we appreciate that. That's great. So one last thing, and you've kind of talked about this a little bit already, but and leaning into your delusional optimism. All right, leaning into that just a little bit. Become a futurist here for a second. When we think about education, you know, how it exists now, and then with new tools and new strategies and new ideas, and let's just say that lots of people start adopting some of these things that we're talking about. What's the future of education 20, 25, 50 years from now? Just put on your futurist hat and lean into your optimism there. What do you think?
It's a good question. I have been thinking about this for a while, and I'm going to approach this from two ways. I will lean into my delusional optimism a bit. Unfortunately, that's just where I'm at. But I have more of a realistic side I have to address. I see two specific streams coming out of education. We're starting to see it. There's a guy up here, a psychologist up here in Canada. He is creating a university. We've got a whole bunch of people thinkers who are creating new types of universities. Okay, we've always seen that up here in Canada. We've had a couple of universities that start up that were radical. Evergreen University in Washington State was quite different. Didn't go the way that it could have. So we're starting to see some different streams of education, both at the primary and the secondary level. Okay, so we're seeing different streams. Unfortunately, a lot of these educational institutes will go away. Theodore Sizer had created, I can't remember what the schools were called, but he had 1,000 of these schools. And after he died in 2007, the last one closed, I think within 10 years of him dying. And if you don't have this force to keep these alternative forms of education going, they go away. Okay. So I have a caution. Yes, we're seeing some potential there. It's amazing. It's wonderful. Different streams. But I think if we can infiltrate the existing environment with a bunch of delusional optimists who are simply doing projects, get kids to build stuff, give them some choice, give them some ownership, help them find their voice as they build something real, we can impact and start a little bit of a disruption from within. Yeah, I've always been on the outside trying to build something different, but I've moved back to the inside as an internal disruptive innovator. I have my sinister agenda. I'm trying to change things from within. And you know what? Kids want something different. People want something different. We're at a point in society where we have got all this amazing potential. I'm going to step out of the screen for a little bit, but oh my gosh, the things we can do with this. Once you start to see the potential, it's amazing. And I think we're going to see two streams. We're going to have credentialing education, where answer questions on the exam to get a certificate, get a credential. AI will take care of that. And then we'll have a group of educators who will be igniting the world with all their students building and creating the future. I think we're going to see two distinct streams. Okay. I'm up here in Canada. We have a federal government that controls everything. And in order to pass your helicopter mechanics exam, you have to pass a federal exam. In order to be a mariner, there's a mariner program here. You have to pass a federal exam. And when you look at these ridiculous exams, it's just mind numbing regurgitation. And yet you've got people who are working with some of the most sophisticated technology, and lives are at stake. And so you're going to have these credentialing institutes. We have them up here in Canada. They're called polytechnical institutes. Community colleges in the States, and also some of the polytechs in the States handle that. So there's going to be credentialing institutions, and then there's going to be creative institutions. Unfortunately, most of it's going to be credentialing, but I think we're going to see an emergence of long-term credentialing coming out of existing institutions. That's my hope. I don't think going to the outside and building something completely separate and trying to disrupt that way will be as successful. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be there. Montessori, there were always Montessori schools. There's still Montessori schools. So you've got all these external fringe influences that have always been there, and they'll always be there. But if we want a bigger disruption, we have to go back in to the institutions, sort of like what you experienced in the DLL. Think about that. Yeah. I was a bit of a, am I a conventional instructor? Was that a conventional program?
No, not at all. No, it was frustrating, but it was amazing at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, Dr. Harapnuik, just tell me what I need to do. No, this isn't the way school works. You just give me a test, damn it. Right? A lot of your classmates felt that way, right? And you heard them lamenting that. But again, you toughed it out. No, I warned you folks all the way along. I said, you're going to work harder. You're going to be frustrated. Your anxiety level is going to be up there. But guess what? You'll get used to it, right? I was honest with you. And now here we are. You're paying it forward. You're paying it forward. You recognize the power of engaging the learner and get them to build something real. And you're paying it forward. Yes. When I got the email from you, I'm going, yes. Oh, this is wonderful. I'm so excited to be here, and keep on doing what you're doing. It'll pay off. Yeah. And I joke around. I'm changing the world one learner at a time. But you know what? If a few of your colleagues come in and go, oh my gosh, I'm gonna experiment with this. Once they start, they'll be hooked. Yeah, they'll be hooked. So keep on doing what you guys are doing. I'm so excited for you because you're paying my ideas forward. And my ideas aren't even new. I was just echoing Dewey and Piaget and Bruner, right? These are old ideas. We're actually building on an older foundation. There's a lot of history in terms of these project-based learning, autonomy, ownership, agency. These are old ideas. It goes back even before those theorists to the old days of the guilds. People learned by doing, experimenting, and improving, right? So we're carrying on this tradition of igniting people to improve the future. I think it's an exciting time. Does that help with your futuristic two streams?
Oh, I love it. No, that was great. That was great. Great answer. Great answer. Beta, do you have any closing thoughts? Or I'm sorry, Dr. Harapnuik, go ahead.
Yeah, I have to warn you. Back in the early 90s, I said that's the most amazing time to be a learner. And in 5 years, the world's going to be different. Okay, I was off by 30 years. So, what take my prediction with a grain of salt. It might not move as rapidly as I hope. But again, that hasn't stopped me from going for it. Yeah. And in a closing thought, you asked me about any.
Yeah.
You know what? Here's the other thing. You, in your social studies project, brought people into your world. So as educators, we have an opportunity to show our learners how much fun it is to learn new things, how much fun it is to experiment and to explore. And if you model this fascination and passion for learning about improving the world, you know what? It's kind of contagious. And if you can just do that, it'll change everything. So that's my closing thought. We have it in us. Bring people into your world. Share the amazing world that you see around you. It'll catch for a few people, and that's wonderful.
BJ, do you have anything to close with?
No, not really. I mean, I'm just encouraged and edified by talking with you all about this. I mean, it's always so much fun to have these podcasts, and thank you for bringing Dr. Harapnuik in, and just thank you for sharing all of your wealth of knowledge and information. I know I've benefited from it. I know our teachers will benefit from it on there, and I just thank you for your time on this.
Oh, always a pleasure. If there's anything I can do to help you folks chase this delusional dream of improving the world, hey, just give me a call.
We'll do it. We'll do it.
Well, anytime I need to do a dirt bike jump, I know who to call now.
All right. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to hanging out with you guys again soon. And Dr. Harapnuik, really, it's been a pleasure. Always good to get to talk to you, and I'm so glad that we got to reconnect even after several years now. So, and take care, and look forward to talking to you again in the future.
All right. Likewise, I'm looking forward to having an opportunity to come back.
Welcome to the curve, where ideas take flight. Blending tech and teaching, sparking insight. From digital tips to stories untold, we're here to inspire, to break